Well, so the program, well, it stands for Internet Crimes Against Children, and it's a task force based program that started around 1998 by the U.S. Department of Justice, their Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and the idea was that they would provide a funding source, training, support, organizational and guidelines, guidance for various local and state task forces that they formed around the country. Arkansas we didn't have one until 2003. That was our first grant, our first program. But the ICAC is not just about money, but it's really a programmatic agreement. You got to establish guidelines. You have to have goals and milestones and things like that for the period that you have to reach. The whole thing, though, the point of it all is to target technology facilitated child exploitation and internet crimes against children, whatever form that may be. These days, it's just one of multiple organizations that kind of share parts of those missions. Like, for example, the child advocacy centers around the country. They provide counseling and forensic interviewers for small children. They provide also court support for those people that may need a support animal or just a plushie to hang on to if they have to get on the stand. You can imagine it's a pretty traumatic event. So ICAC works in partnership with all of those others. There are also dedicated groups similar to that, initiatives I should say, similar to that also specifically focus on certain areas or certain disciplines within the greater scope of child abuse and that sort of thing, like human trafficking and whatnot. And it's not exclusive to children oftentimes either. So, but that's the crux of the ICAC program.
Absolutely, and you would kind of say that the and kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but ICAC and programs like it and organizations like it sort of stand in the gateway of exploitation of children and ultimately and people in general, and ultimately the trafficking of people and those types of things, and the generation of content that would exploit these people.
Yeah, I would probably describe it more as almost standing in the gap, really.
Sure.
When I first got started doing this, it wasn't with ICAC. It was actually I was assigned to Little Rock Field Division of FBI, working on their Innocent Images National Initiative, which is a similar kind of concept, but it was ran and managed by a few select FBI field divisions around the country. So I spent a couple of years with them as an investigator, working on these sorts of things. And then the Arkansas State Police, which was my parent agency, they brought me back in 2003 to help get the task force, the Arkansas ICAC task force, kicked off. Which is what I did. But yeah, so I would characterize it almost as, standing in the gap too. I mean, certainly in cooperation with other agencies and organizations and affiliations that are working on this problem, but everybody is really standing in that gap.
Absolutely. And I know it's probably I'm sure that it's probably difficult to answer what I want to ask you, but when you think about how children are exploited, how online facilitates that, how widespread is that? Well,
you never ask a cop what's wrong in the world, right? Because they don't see anything but that, everything that they see. You don't ask an emergency room nurse, hey, what do you think about the world these days? It's all bad. Nobody ever comes knocking on your door that's everything's happy, right?
Yeah, sure.
So my response would probably be a lot more pessimistic. But I'll say this, that when I first got started with FBI as a task force investigator, well, first off, I didn't want to do the work to begin with. I've been a cop a long time, an investigator, detective a long time, and up to that point, and child child abuse of any form, that was always, it's the kind of crime I couldn't, no, I can't do that. Right.
Sure.
So my captain approached me one day and he said, "Hey, how'd you like to work hackers?" Hackers. Now, I thought that was cool, right? I always liked tech investigations anyway, that kind of thing, wiring up hotel rooms, and I love that kind of stuff. And hackers, yeah. Now, at this point, you have to bear in mind that I could send and receive an email, and I knew if I clicked on the little blue E thingy, that'd take me to this internet deal, whatever that was. That's about the extent of my skills. But hacker, oh yeah, I could do that. So I get over to Innocent Images over to FBI and figure out it's got nothing to do with hackers whatsoever. It's these crimes against children, but it's too late. I'd already volunteered, so there was no going back. But the longer that I stayed there, the more I began to see what the scope of the problem. So to answer your question, the more I could see the greater picture, I guess, the bigger picture of the scope of the problem was, even at the time. And not only that, but in 2003, this, even today, this is still a fairly new area of investigation.
Sure.
For law enforcement, but then it certainly was. 2003, it's a long time ago. And I saw how few of us were standing in that gap, and ultimately I came to the realization, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. But if not me, then who?
Yeah.
So I stayed with it, and it's changed the entire course of the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Even today. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
So I don't know. I can't give you a figure. I know that it knows no socioeconomic boundaries. I know that those who would engage in those types of activities, whatever they are, including human trafficking, that they it's. I think for the longest time, at least in this country, we tend to think of the Chester the molester type, right? The guy in the trench coat standing at the edge of the schoolyard. I'm not saying that Chester doesn't exist. I've met a couple of Chesters in my time. But it's more than that. It's people of responsibility that take advantage of those situations. It's parents, it's preachers, it's cops, it's lawyers, it's doctors, it's teachers, it's caregivers, it's youth worship leaders, it's everybody. There is no socioeconomic indicator as to who might be a predator. It could be anyone. And I know it sounds like a the sky is falling, a doomsayer, and it's not my intent to, inspire paranoia or, sow distrust or, it's like everywhere you look in the news these days. And I think it's been that way all of our lives, honestly. It just seems more in the forefront today that every time you turn the channel on, it's some sort of disastrous thing,
Sure.
What's next?
Sure,
it's a chemical spill over here. It's Chinese and Russian warships, in the Aleutian Islands over there. It's some spy balloon that somehow transited the entire continental United States. It's some nonsense all the time. It's some emergency all the time. And I don't want to be another voice in the den of voices that are screaming that the sky is falling. But I think to say that this problem is widespread, it permeates every culture, every socioeconomic category that you can think of. There's no race or gender or any sort of discrimination there. It affects all people, both as victims and as perpetrators, and it's in every place on this planet that's covered by land.
Yeah.
So
Saying
anything less is an understatement.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. And I think in all fairness too, is that I think sometimes when we talk about things like this, we sometimes, kind of look inside of ourselves and go, I've got to protect me and mine and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's not something that people should do as well. But I also think though that, as Christians, we're called to be, to in fact, the Bible talks about how that we should care about the plight of the widows and the orphans. And so it's also part of our responsibility before God that it's not just about making sure I'm okay, but it's also being aware of the suffering of others. And I think somehow in that knowledge of that suffering, it makes us better, realizing that there's somebody else going through something and I should care.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think, I remember as a little kid, I remember that there was a little girl that was abducted in Bologna.
Yes.
It made the national news. It was like such an unusual thing. It happens almost seems like every other day now, and barely even registers on the news wire. But then it was a huge deal, and I think that our parents then did a good job with us. The stranger danger kind of thing like that. And I think that we also, those that are, family oriented, value our families. We regardless of what your role is, mother, father, whatever, you see yourself as a protector, as a guider for your children, all that kind of stuff. That's all good. And I think that we carry on that tradition very well, of, watch out for strangers, But our enemy is not just strangers, our enemy is, it's the devil,
That's right.
It's the person of responsibility for your children. Yes, stranger abductions happen all the time. Adam Walsh, big famous case, like that. But more often than not, it's somebody that the child knows, and it's not those incidents, those occur clearly. But it's not those incidents where something happens to a child and poof, they're gone from us, but rather repeated victimization over time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found most frustrating, I know you didn't ask me this, but one of the things that I found most frustrating, you can always count on bad guys to be bad guys.
Yeah.
Sure.
You can always count on perpetrators to perpetrate, right?
Sure.
Criminals to crim.
Right.
But the thing that I found to be most disheartening was you can't always count on good guys to be good.
That's good.
We've gotten so good at stranger danger, and I think that partly because we always want to think that that's who's going to be, that's who our problem is. That's where the threat's coming from, and we just can't bring ourselves to think that the threat's coming from inside our own house, or next door, or at school, or at daycare, or at Uncle Tom and Aunt Jenny's house. But it is, or at church, or at the grocery store. But it is, it is. It is.
Yeah. Absolutely. And in this, obviously, this is extremely. In order to do the work that you've done and the task force have done, the teams have done, you have to enter a side of the world that many people would rather just completely ignore altogether and cease to believe even exists. And I know that obviously I do not have the experience that you have, but even watching, Sound of Freedom just came out, this movie that's designed in part to highlight a particular story that actually turns out to be a really beautiful story, horrible, but beautiful. Sadly, most stories don't go that way, but this one did. And they kind of shine a spotlight on this side of the world that is going on all around us that most of us don't seem to see. And I know you've seen plenty of that and experienced plenty of that. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, in that time of working through that, were there bright spots and moments, and maybe what did those bright spots look like for you?
Well, so most of my investigative work prior to doing this kind of stuff was in narcotics. Narcotics is socially considered to be a victimless crime. Drugs,
sure,
victimless crime, and there's lots of unsavory things that we've heard about the war on drugs and all this kind of stuff like that. Considered to be a victimless crime, which is not true at all. But I know that's a different topic.
No, keep rolling, keep going.
But I will say, to that, the thing that was both horrifying and rejuvenating at the same time about doing this is that there's a real person connected to your investigation that cannot help themselves.
Yeah.
That, I mentioned a minute ago about you can't always count on good guys being good guys, right? Certainly resources are limited, whether this is coming from a federal grant or a state grant or, a special interest group or wherever it's coming from. Funds are always going to be limited. You're never, ever, I don't care what you do. I'm sure here at the church, you don't have all the money you'd like to have at any given time to do the things that, you feel like you need to be doing. Same thing for law enforcement, right? There's always competition there. You need new body armor. You get new body armor, well, that's going to have to be replaced sooner or later.
Sure.
You need flashlights. You need patrol cars. You need this. You need that. Everything competes with everything else. When you're struggling for resources to do this or any other type of investigative work, you're not competing really against the body armor budget. You're not really competing against the flashlight budget. You're not really competing against the patrol car budget. What you're competing against is that telephone on the chief's desk that's going to ring when somebody calls to complain about something, whether that's a suspicious person in their neighborhood or a noise or whatever it may be, thefts or, any other crimes against persons. All those things are very legitimate things that police administration must focus on. That's what we're here for. That's what we do, right?
Sure.
Or that's what I did. I totally understand that. But at the same time, I also understand that the victims in my cases aren't calling anybody.
Sure.
Right? 5-year-old's not calling anyone. An 18-month-old infant is not calling anyone. Who they going to call? That phone never rings. That's who we're competing against. So.
At any given time, how many different cases would you be working on?
Yeah. So, well, it varies, I would say on average, and I don't know what it's like today. I haven't been a practitioner for 6 years now.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it's like today, but I can tell you for the people that work for me at that time, investigators that work for me, on average, they'd have 40, 50 cases on their desk at any given time.
Each one of the investigators.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Each one. Yes. At any given moment. And they're very unpredictable. They're all very often protracted, so they take a long time to work. One of the things that I learned to miss going into CID from patrol was, at least at patrol at the end of the day, I could, when I hung my gun belt up, that was it,
Yeah.
I did my little reports and I'm done. Tomorrow, new day, so I'm going to start all over again, no doubt. But I could leave yesterday behind, accepting memories, of course.
Sure.
The work, in other words, didn't continue. But for a criminal investigator, this kind or any other kind of criminal investigator, doesn't actually end that way. Sure. It just gets deeper the next day. You do resolve cases, of course. That's good when you do. But you can't get to all of them. There's a story I heard a long time ago. It makes me think of this. There's this boy. He was on the beach, and early one morning, just by himself, and this beach was just covered. The tide had gone out, left all these starfish on the beach, and this old man was walking along, and he saw this boy in the distance. He was throwing these starfish back in the ocean, and the old man got a pretty good idea what the boy was doing. He gets up there and says, "Hey, son, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm saving starfish." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Now look, son, I want you to take a look. Look to your left down the beach, look to your right down the beach. I want you to tell me what you see on the beach in as far as you can see in either direction." He said, "Well, starfish." He said, "That's why I'm here." He said, "Yeah, I understand that." He said, "You don't possibly think you're going to get to all those starfish now, do you, before they die?" And the boy thought about it for a minute. He was holding the starfish in his hand. He thought about it. And he turned it over. He threw that one in the water. He said, what I do may not matter to all of them, but it mattered to that one.
Yeah.
So that's what you do. I'll say, and I don't know if this is anything that your listeners even care about, but when I was in narcotics, there was always the concern that, the undercover officer gets too undercover, right? They either get in a bad shape with their funds that they're given to buy drugs with. They use that out of that pocket instead of their personal money out of the other pocket, and they get in trouble. Or they get too familiar with informants of the opposite sex, they get in trouble. Or they identify too closely with who they're trying to portray, and they get in trouble with drugs themselves, and I've seen that happen. Not very often, but I have seen that happen in the course of my career. Nietzsche, who I don't hold up as a pillar of truth to anybody.
Right.
But he did say a few smart things. And one of the things he said that when you stare too deeply into the abyss stares back into you.
Yeah.
I was less concerned about my investigators becoming the monster that they chased, and much more concerned about them becoming overzealous.
Yeah.
And I made sure most cases that I was the last one to leave at the end of the day. Now, that might be 8 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
But I tried to make sure I was the last one to leave. And if I saw them working too late, I'd ask, why are you here? Why are you still here? Why are you still here? Now, I know why they're still here because I was there. I've done that. You know that whenever you go home, in this case that's active, these 50 cases that you have on your desk that are active, that you haven't solved, that whatever hell that kid has endured up to this point, they're going to endure again tonight.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to break yourself away at the end of the day from that. You think if I just do a little bit more here, get caught up on this paperwork, then tomorrow, I could focus more on this case or whatever it may be. And, you end up staying too long, right? You end up sacrificing your family on the altar of work.
Yeah.
I did that too, even to the point of losing them. But when you're responsible for investigators doing this work, you have an obligation not to let it happen to them. And people do lose their objectivity when kids are involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They don't know when to go home.
Yeah.
And it's not just that, I paid attention to their personal lives. When people who do this work, and we don't see ourselves as victims. I'm not a victim. I can tell you that right now. I know what a victim looks like, and it ain't me.
Sure.
But when that investigator parent finds it hard when they do go home to hug their kids and only see their kids and not,
Yeah.
then that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And that's what a good supervisor is for, not to hold their feet to the fire, but to make sure that they live to fight another day.
Yeah.
Man, I said I wasn't going to do this. And it's oftentimes, good grief, this is not what you asked me.
No, this is what we
This is what people need to hear and need to see, though. This is what it is.
Every investigator that investigates some crime against persons, whatever that may be, rape investigators, homicide investigators, they have a crazy, incredible burden.
Yeah.
But this is the only investigation because of digital media.
Yeah.
that makes you witness to the thing that happened.